Money is supposed to be the most solid thing in our lives. Numbers that add up, assets you can touch, value you can trust. But sometimes, entire fortunes are nothing more than smoke in a very expensive mirror. Tonight, we're diving into financial worlds where paperwork lies, ledgers dream, and everyone swears it's real until it isn't. Tonight, every story ties back to incredible financial frauds. Here's how TruLies works. You're about to hear 7 stories of money, deception, and audacity. Some come straight from case files, courtrooms, and headline scandals. Others were engineered just for this show, stitched together from the kinds of schemes that almost could have happened. Your job? Decide which ones are real and which are pure fiction. 4 of these tales truly took place. 3 are complete inventions. Keep score as you go, don't peek ahead, and drop your final tally in the comments. At least one of your instincts will betray you. 7 chapters in the book of financial illusion. Some begin with a simple form, others with a stack of cash, a forged identity, or a very convincing story. Listen closely to every detail, from the smallest signature to the biggest promise. Here are tonight's 7 stories. Lock in your first impressions now, before the verdicts pull the floor out from under. Let's open the ledger with story 1, where what's written on paper and what's hiding in plain sight may not be the same thing at all. On the New Jersey waterfront in the early 1960s, rows of shining metal tanks promised oceans of valuable soybean salad oil, and banks, traders, and inspectors all believed they were looking at a gold mine in liquid form. Behind this glittering setup stood Anthony Tino DeAngelis, a smooth-talking commodities trader whose earlier school lunch food business had already collapsed amid accounting smoke and mirrors. Reinvented as an oil king through his company, Allied Crude Vegetable Oil, DeAngelis waved impressive paperwork and warehouse receipts, convincing powerful banks that his tanks were packed with oil they could safely lend against. Inspectors climbed the tanks, opened the hatches, and dipped long measuring rods, seeing and touching several feet of golden oil on top. Exactly what they expected, so they happily signed off and went home. What no one checked was below the surface. Almost the entire tank was cheap seawater, with only a thin layer of real oil floating above, perfectly exploiting one simple fact of physics: oil floats on water. With these fake reserves, DeAngelis borrowed more and more, pledging the same few tanks to multiple lenders, while telex machines spat out loan approvals and Wall Street firms booked easy profits on his supposed stockpiles. For a while, as prices stayed high and payments kept flowing, the illusion held. Everyone trusted the paperwork, the famous inspection companies, and the appearance of full tanks they never truly tested. In 1963, strange trading moves, missed payments, and nervous questions finally forced deeper inspections. When the tanks were properly sampled and drained, the truth spilled out: thin salad oil on top of towering columns of seawater. Panic ripped through financial markets as losses soared over $150 million. A major Wall Street brokerage staggered toward collapse, and regulators quietly pushed big banks into a rescue to prevent wider disaster. DeAngelis was convicted of fraud, and the salad oil swindle became a lasting warning. If you only glance at the shiny surface and trust the logos on the paperwork, you may never see the ocean of risk underneath. We turn the page to story 2 and sail into a scheme where profit floats on the surface while the truth sinks out of sight. In the late 1990s, as small investors first went online, a charming Swedish promoter unveiled the Baltic Shipping Income Fund, promising safe, steady profits from fractional ownership in hard-working cargo ships crossing the cold, gray Baltic Sea. Glossy brochures showed sturdy freighters pushing through ice, tidy route maps between Nordic and German ports, and impressive-looking insurance certificates that made the whole thing feel solid, respectable, and almost boring in the best possible way. Investors logged into a private website, watched little green dots slide across a digital Baltic map, and read believable updates about timber and grain cargoes, port calls, and day-by-day freight rates for their personally assigned ship. Quarter after quarter, statements arrived listing charter income, fuel and port costs, modest maintenance, and a calm, reassuring profit. So people reinvested, boasted about owning part of a freighter, and felt smarter than friends chasing risky tech stocks. Behind the scenes, the fleet was almost pure fiction. The promoters owned only one tired barge, which they kept repainting, renaming, and photographing from new angles, while a friendly editor digitally tweaked colors, flags, and hull markings. They stole identities from old maritime registers, assigning names and IMO numbers from ships long ago scrapped in distant Turkish yards, then used simple code to animate fake routes and storms for dozens of ghost vessels on the website. Money flowed in from Sweden, Finland, Germany, Britain, and the Netherlands, and early returns were quietly paid with new investments, a soft Ponzi scheme wrapped in shipping jargon and the comforting myth of real steel and real cargo. Everything began to crack when a ship-loving small businessman from Lübeck, proud of his investment, decided during a Baltic holiday that he wanted to stand on his deck, breathe diesel fumes, and finally see his freighter in port. He followed the website's schedule to Rostock, waited at the pier for hours, then learned from harbor officials and databases that his vessel's IMO number belonged to a freighter scrapped years earlier, and many other fun ships were also dead. By the time police and regulators reacted, the offices were empty, phones dead, the website offline, accounts drained, and the single real barge sold off, leaving only angry investors, hollow shell companies, and a haunting lesson about digital ghosts at sea. Now to story 3, where a single suitcase, a roll of dice, and a mountain of cash collide in the unlikeliest of bet slips. Imagine walking into a luxury mansion in Mexico City and realizing the walls aren't covered in art, but in bricks of cash stacked from the floor almost to the ceiling. In March 2007, Mexican and U.S. agents raided this house in the rich Lomas de Chapultepec neighborhood, expecting a businessman's home office, and instead finding the world's largest drug-related cash seizure. Room after room overflowed with plastic-wrapped bundles of $100 bills, plus euros and pesos piled on beds, tables, and even the floor, more than $205 million in U.S. cash alone. The owner, Zhenli Yegan, was a Chinese-Mexican businessman who officially ran a booming pharmaceutical chemical import company, supplying ingredients used in cold medicines. Investigators said his real business was shipping pseudoephedrine and other precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels, using shell companies, fake paperwork, and corrupt officials to keep tons of meth ingredients flowing. To prosecutors, the mansion's cash was the physical proof of a hidden empire. Drug and chemical profits laundered through businesses, then stored in rooms like a private underground bank. Yegan insisted he was legit, claiming the money came from legal pharmaceutical sales and that he was being sacrificed in a politically charged war on drugs. Then he made an explosive claim. He said political operatives had dumped bags of election cash at his house and ordered him to keep it safe by laundering it in Las Vegas casinos as gambling winnings. Mexican authorities fiercely denied his story. U.S. charges later tangled in evidentiary issues, and after years of legal battles, he was finally extradited to Mexico in 2016 to face organized crime and drug-related charges. The mansion was auctioned off, the cash long gone, but those surreal photos of money-lined rooms still haunt people as a reminder that behind respectable facades, entire hidden economies of cash can quietly shape our world. Story 4 waits in the quiet margins, a name that should have vanished, and money that refuses to stop arriving. In a quiet Ohio town in the late 1980s, a meticulous, tired accountant buried his older brother, and with him, he thought, the only truly responsible man in their small, ordinary family. Days after the funeral, instead of calling Social Security, the pension fund, or the companies sending dividend checks, he made a different choice. He decided his brother simply wouldn't die on paper. He rented a new P.O. box across town, filled out mail forwarding forms, and calmly redirected every pension statement, dividend notice, and shareholder letter from his dead brother's house to a small metal door with a new key. At his kitchen table, he opened the envelopes, forged his brother's looping signature onto dividend reinvestment forms, ticked the boxes to reinvest in additional shares, and ignored anything that mentioned death, estates, or final paperwork. The years rolled by, companies merged, small utilities were swallowed by larger ones, shareholder ledgers were scanned into modern databases, and every new system simply copied the old lie without ever asking, is this man still alive? Dividends quietly bought more shares, stock splits multiplied them again, and as balances crept from 5 figures to 6 and beyond, the accountant occasionally sold tiny slices, wiring the proceeds into his own accounts without any flashy changes to his modest life. On the surface, he was the picture of normalcy. Retired number cruncher, church volunteer, property tax complainer. While in filing cabinets at home, he kept obsessively neat folders, tracking the growing fortune of a brother who'd been dead for decades. Then, after a big financial institution acquired one of those companies, its anti-money laundering software flagged something odd. A shareholder nearly 90, no digital contact, no address changes, but periodic stock sales feeding money to a man with a different name. A compliance analyst dug deeper, finding an old obituary and matching Social Security death index record, then realized the impossible. The company had been paying dividends and honoring trades for a man officially dead for almost 30 years. When federal agents finally knocked, they found an old man with arthritis and perfect paperwork. By then, his dead brother's accounts had generated over $1.8 million, proof that in a world run by automated records, even the dead can keep getting paid, until an algorithm notices. Reset your instincts for Story 5, a tale where returns are so smooth, so steady, they almost dare you to question them. In a world where the stock market whipsaws up and down, one man in a sleek Manhattan office seems to defy gravity, quietly offering rich, steady gains that feel as calm and regular as a heartbeat. Bernard Madoff, former NASDAQ chairman and self-made Wall Street legend, runs an ultra-exclusive fund where entry is by whisper, referral, and reputation. People beg to get in, fearing more missing out than losing money. Emfro. Madoff explains it all with confidence. A complex split-strike conversion, using blue-chip stocks and options to cushion risk, a strategy that sounds technical enough that most investors stop asking hard questions. Behind the polished image, red flags flutter. Madoff clears his own trades, prints his own statements, uses a tiny strip mall auditor, and refuses independent scrutiny that any ordinary big-money manager would consider routine. A few skeptics, like analyst Harry Markopoulos, run the numbers, compare them to real options markets, and conclude the truth is simple and terrifying. The trades Madoff claims to make are mathematically impossible at that scale. For years, Markopoulos sends detailed warnings to regulators, but Madoff's status, charm, and a lack of obvious smoking guns keep the machine running as banks, charities, and wealthy families pour in billions more. In reality, there is no magic strategy. New investor money sits in bank accounts and is used to pay withdrawals and fake profits to earlier investors, a classic Ponzi scheme disguised as genius. When the 2008 financial crisis hits and terrified clients rush to withdraw billions at once, the cash simply isn't there, and Madoff finally admits to his sons that his empire is one big lie. After his arrest, as victims around the world confront lost life savings and collapsed charities, the lesson echoes. If someone promises steady, low-risk returns that never really lose, the safest move is to walk away. On to Story 6, where holy letterhead, sacred real estate, and very worldly bank accounts intersect in a most unholy balance sheet. In a cozy Roman restaurant just steps from the Vatican walls, wine glasses clinked softly as a charming Italian businessman leaned in, his silver crucifix catching the light, and spoke of a secret mission to save the church's hidden treasures. He told wealthy Catholic guests that the Vatican desperately needed discreet private financing to buy and restore crumbling monasteries, palaces, and convents, properties too politically sensitive to appear on any public market. With calm confidence, he unfolded thick cream stationery embossed with the Holy See's coat of arms, letters written in formal, old-fashioned language and bearing what looked like the flowing signatures of powerful cardinals blessing his heritage mission. During each dinner, priests in immaculate cassocks would drift by, clasp his shoulder, exchange friendly jokes in Italian, nod politely to the guests, and disappear again, silently confirming that he truly moved in sacred circles. He promised investors generous returns and something he called a higher form of gratitude, private masses in hidden chapels, special blessings, maybe even quiet audiences inside Vatican offices once the projects were complete. Soon, millions of euros flowed into shell companies in Luxembourg and Malta, with pious names like Heritage Acquisitions and Cultural Patrimony Fund, their paperwork full of technical phrases about off-market ecclesiastical assets. At a mid-sized European bank, a wary compliance officer noticed that all these transfers referenced the same vaguely named religious building, supposedly Vatican property, yet no registry, land record, or heritage list showed it existed at all. He quietly called a contact in the Vatican's real estate office, read out the building's name, and heard only puzzled silence. No such property, no file, no code, nothing. Forensic experts then exposed the illusion. Vatican letterhead recreated from old scans, pixel patterns betraying cut-and-paste work, and cardinal signatures digitally stitched together from unrelated authentic memos. When the scam collapsed, victims realized they hadn't just lost money, they had paid dearly for the feeling of being spiritually inside, proving how easily faith, status, and the promise of holy access can blind even the most sophisticated people. And finally, Story 7, a socialite apparition gliding through the elite, turning thin air into credit on demand. In mid-2010s New York, a young woman in oversized designer glasses steps from a black car and introduces herself with a cool European accent. "I'm Anna Delvey, German heiress," as doors to elite parties swing open around her. She lives in 5-star hotels, tips in $100 bills, posts rooftop views on Instagram, and talks casually about a €60 million trust fund that will soon arrive from her powerful family in Europe. Over cocktails and gallery openings, Anna dazzles founders, art dealers, and financiers with plans for an exclusive arts club in Manhattan, Michelin-starred chefs, curated exhibitions, a private playground for the global rich. When investors and banks ask for proof, she emails polished, forged bank statements showing tens of millions overseas, drops real bankers' names, and speaks in fluent finance jargon until they start believing the paperwork matches the lifestyle. Luxury hotels, impressed by her entourage and Instagram sheen, extend tens of thousands in credit on a photocopied passport and her favorite phrase, "The wire is coming, my family office is just slow." Behind the scenes, there is no trust fund, only bounced checks, stalled wire transfers, and friends persuaded to put flights, private jets, and resort bills on their cards just for now, while she promises to pay them back tomorrow. The illusion grows as people see her everywhere that screams money. Front row dinners, chauffeured cars, marble lobbies, assuming anyone who looks this rich knows these people, and spends like this must be exactly who she claims. It unravels when one fed-up luxury hotel, tired of excuses and invisible wires, locks her out of her suite, and staff begin comparing notes about unpaid bills, conflicting stories, and a so-called heiress who never actually pays. Investigators uncover her real identity, Anna Sorokin, Russian-born and raised in Germany, along with forged documents, an attempted $22 million loan, huge hotel debts, and a friend stuck with a $62,000 Morocco vacation bill. In a New York courtroom in 2019, she's convicted of theft of services and grand larceny, and as she's sentenced to prison, her story lives on as a sharp reminder of how badly we want to believe in glamorous wealth. 7 stories of wealth conjured, borrowed, and stolen. 4 of them walk through real banks, real courts, and real headlines. 3 existed only in our imagination until tonight. This is the moment where your guesses either pay off or go bust. Hold your score in your mind. Here are the answers. Story 1. The salad oil that wasn't there was real. Investigators, regulators, and financial records confirm that phantom soybean oil once toppled markets and ruined a major brokerage. Story 2. The ghost ships of the Baltic was fictional. We built this fleet from classic investment scams, blending paper-only assets and doctored photos into one haunting maritime mirage. Story 3. The casino suitcase of Jenny Yegan was real. Law enforcement photos, court filings, and seized evidence document those rooms stacked floor to ceiling with cash. Story 4. The dead man who kept getting dividends was fictional. This quiet fraud was crafted from real loopholes and inheritance abuses, distilled into one long-running posthumous plea. Story 5. The impossible consistency of Bernard Madoff was real. Regulatory archives, criminal prosecutions, and victim testimonies lay out the largest Ponzi scheme of its kind ever exposed. Story 6. The Vatican letterhead scam was fictional. We assembled forged letterhead, shell companies, and spiritual promises from several true scandals and fused them into a single elegant card. Story 7. The socialite who tricked New York's elite was real. Criminal trials, press coverage, and hotel records confirm that a fake heiress really did charge her way through Manhattan. Count your correct calls, share your score, and ask yourself, which story should you have seen coming? And which fraud will you never quite trust your instincts about again?